Taiwan is one of the most important and most dangerous flashpoints in the world today. Sitting at the heart of East Asia, this small island holds enormous power over global geopolitics, the world economy, and the future of technology. First, Taiwan dominates the global semiconductor industry. It produces more than 90% of the world's most advanced computer chips, the invisible engines that power smartphones, artificial intelligence, military systems, and modern life itself. Without Taiwan, the digital world would slow to a halt. Second, Taiwan's location places it directly on the first island chain, making it a critical pressure point in the growing rivalry between the United States and China. Control over Taiwan could reshape the balance of power in the entire Indo-Pacific region. Third, Taiwan stands out as a vibrant democracy in a region largely shaped by different systems of governance. Its political model challenges the regional status quo and adds another layer of tension to its global significance. This video also examines the One China policy and the unresolved question of Taiwan's political status, a question that carries the risk of triggering a conflict with global consequences. In February 2024, Foreign Affairs released a powerful video warning titled, "The Taiwan Catastrophe." It described a near-apocalyptic future, one where China takes control of Taiwan, and the consequences ripple across the entire world. Not long after, The Economist labeled Taiwan the most dangerous place on Earth. And former U.S. President Joe Biden repeatedly stated that the United States would defend Taiwan if conflict were to break out. For years, China promoted the idea of peaceful reunification under the one country, two systems framework, offering Taiwan limited autonomy. But as Taiwan strengthened its international presence and forged a distinct identity, that approach began to unravel. Chinese President Xi Jinping made China's position unmistakably clear when he declared, "The Taiwan issue cannot be passed from generation to generation." Today, China has both the military capability and the political will to bring Taiwan under its control, by force if necessary. Beijing views Taiwan as a breakaway territory that must eventually be unified with the mainland. On the other side, the United States opposes any unilateral change to the status quo. Washington sees Taiwan as a critical economic and security partner, one whose fall could seriously weaken U.S. influence in the Pacific and disrupt the global order. Admiral Phil Davidson, the former head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, warned that China could attempt to seize Taiwan as early as 2027. One thing is clear, Taiwan has become the central arena of competition between China and the United States. According to political theorist John Mearsheimer, this rivalry carries the real risk of a direct military confrontation between the world's two most powerful nations. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's current stance on Taiwan remains uncertain. However, given the sharp rise in U.S.-China tensions during his first term, it is unlikely that any future U.S. administration would ignore Taiwan's strategic importance. To understand how we reached this point, we have to look back at history. In 1895, China ceded Taiwan to Japan after losing the First Sino-Japanese War. After Japan's defeat in World War II, control of Taiwan returned to China's ruling party at the time, the Kuomintang, or KMT. But in 1949, after losing the Chinese Civil War to the Communists, the KMT fled to Taiwan. Since then, Taiwan has been governed separately, and the People's Republic of China has never exercised control over the island. Between 1949 and 1979, China pursued an aggressive strategy to reclaim Taiwan. This led to two major Taiwan Strait crises in the 1950s, moments when war seemed imminent. Only the presence of U.S. naval forces and a mutual defense treaty between Washington and Taipei prevented China from taking the island. After 1979, when the United States officially recognized the People's Republic of China and cut formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, Beijing softened its approach, at least temporarily. But today, the question remains more dangerous than ever. Taiwan is no longer just an island. It is a trigger point where history, power, and the future of the global order collide. Taiwan's international significance. Taiwan sits directly across from China's Fujian province. Though small in size, covering nearly 36,000 square kilometers, its location makes it one of the most strategically important places on Earth. The island lies at the very heart of the first island chain, stretching from southern Japan down to the Philippines. At its closest point, Taiwan is just 130 kilometers from mainland China, close enough to see conflict coming, but far enough to remain fiercely contested. To the south lies the Luzon Strait, including the Bashi and Balantang channels, critical gateways linking the South China Sea to the Pacific Ocean. To the northeast, Japan's southwestern islands narrow the surrounding waters, forcing ships to pass through tight maritime corridors just to reach the open Pacific. These waters are not just strategic, they are vital to global trade. The Taiwan Strait and the nearby South China Sea form one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, connecting Northeast Asia with the Middle East and Europe. According to a 2024 analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, nearly $2.45 trillion worth of goods, around one-fifth of all global maritime trade, passed through the Taiwan Strait in 2022 alone. Any disruption here would send shockwaves across the global economy. If shipping were forced to reroute through alternative passages like the Luzon Strait, or worse, the Miyako Strait, routes would stretch by nearly 1,600 kilometers. That means longer travel times, higher fuel costs, and massive logistical challenges. Avoiding Chinese and Taiwanese ports would further strain global supply chains, driving prices even higher. The countries hit hardest would be U.S. allies in East Asia, especially Japan and South Korea, whose economies depend heavily on uninterrupted maritime trade. But Taiwan's importance goes far beyond geography. The island is the beating heart of the global semiconductor industry. Taiwan produces nearly 70% of the world's semiconductors and an astonishing 90% of the most advanced computer chips. These chips power everything, from smartphones and laptops to cars, factories, and military systems. If Taiwanese chip production were disrupted, the effects would be immediate and devastating. Industries around the world would face shortages, factory shutdowns, and economic paralysis. And there is a harsh reality: no country and no company on Earth can replace Taiwan's chip-making capacity in the short term. This is why a Chinese attack on Taiwan, whether successful or not, would not remain a regional conflict. It would trigger a global economic crisis, potentially plunging the world into a deep depression and inflicting long-lasting damage on the international economy. Taiwan is not just an island. It is a lifeline, and if it breaks, the world will feel it. To understand why Taiwan matters so deeply to China, we must first understand history. In China, the period from 1839 to 1949 is remembered as the Century of Humiliation. It includes the Opium Wars, the Sino-Japanese Wars, foreign invasions, internal revolutions, and finally, the Chinese Civil War. In Chinese historical memory, this era represents a time when China was weak, divided, and exploited by colonial powers. This narrative is not just history, it is politics. The Communist Party has long used the Century of Humiliation as a tool for national unity and legitimacy, and it continues to shape China's foreign policy today. The unresolved outcome of the Civil War, the event that ended this humiliating century, is the reason China does not control Taiwan. For Beijing, Taiwan is not just territory. It is an emotional symbol of unfinished history, national dignity, and lost sovereignty. The Chinese government views Taiwan's separation as a historical injustice, one born from China's weakness in the past. In its 2022 White Paper on Taiwan, Beijing described Taiwan's status as a scar left by history on the Chinese nation. This emotional framing leaves little room for compromise. For the Chinese leadership, backing down on Taiwan is not an option. But Taiwan's importance to China goes far beyond emotion. Geographically, Taiwan stands like a gate in front of China's access to the Pacific Ocean. As long as Taiwan is outside Beijing's control, China's navy cannot move freely into the open Pacific without passing through narrow and vulnerable choke points. If Taiwan were controlled by a hostile power, it could threaten China's mainland, its naval forces, and its most vital maritime trade routes. For China, Taiwan is the key that unlocks unhindered access to the Western Pacific. The Taiwan Strait connects the East China Sea and the South China Sea, two regions critical to China's economy and security. This route links Northeast Asia to Europe and global markets, making it essential to China's foreign trade. Today, China's naval forces are divided. The Taiwan Strait separates the East and South China Seas, fragmenting China's fleets and limiting their operational effectiveness. Gaining control of Taiwan would unite these waters, allowing China's northern, eastern, and southern fleets to maneuver together as a single force. In military terms, Taiwan could become China's strategic lake. From there, Beijing would gain greater control over key passages like the Bashi Channel to the south and the Miyako Strait to the north, ensuring direct access to the Pacific and strengthening China's position along the first island chain. This would dramatically expand China's naval reach and potentially disrupt U.S. naval and air operations in the Philippine Sea. America's regional allies could find themselves isolated, surrounded by Chinese-controlled territory. If China takes Taiwan, the first island chain, which forms the backbone of U.S. defense strategy in East Asia, would effectively collapse. Maintaining U.S. access and influence in the Western Pacific would become extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. The term, First Island Chain, was introduced in the early 1990s and includes a sweeping arc of territory, from the Aleutian Islands, through Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, down to Southeast Asia. Today, it is a core concept in military and strategic planning. This chain contains vital straits, exclusive economic zones, and disputed waters in the South China Sea. Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, key links in the chain, are all close U.S. partners. From Beijing's perspective, this makes China strategically vulnerable. In any conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea, China would struggle to defend its positions unless it controls Taiwan. Political scientist John Mearsheimer argues that China's long-term goal is to push U.S. naval forces out of the first island chain. And that goal cannot be achieved without taking Taiwan. Even within China, there is little debate on this issue. Influential military texts argue that losing Taiwan to outside powers would strip China of its natural maritime defenses, place its trade routes under constant surveillance, and permanently trap China behind the first island chain. In Beijing's view, as long as Taiwan remains outside its control, China's national security will always be under threat. This is why Taiwan is not just important to China. For China, Taiwan is essential. To understand why Taiwan matters so much to the United States and its East Asian allies, we need to go back to 1949. After losing the Chinese Civil War, U.S.-backed nationalist forces, led by Chiang Kai-shek, fled to Taiwan. Almost immediately, Washington stepped in. Between 1950 and 1953, the U.S. Navy was deployed to the Taiwan Strait to protect the island. From 1954 until 1979, the United States and Taiwan were bound by a formal mutual defense treaty. That treaty ended in 1979, when Washington officially recognized the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of China. But U.S. support for Taiwan did not disappear. In the same year, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, laying the legal foundation for continued U.S.-Taiwan ties and authorizing arms sales to ensure Taiwan could defend itself. In many ways, Taiwan today resembles West Berlin during the Cold War, a small, vulnerable territory caught between rival great powers, and a potential trigger for a catastrophic confrontation. Some analysts even warn that Taiwan could spark a modern Thucydides trap between China and the United States. That tension became even more visible in February 2025, when the U.S. State Department quietly removed the phrase, "We do not support Taiwan's independence," from its website, prompting sharp backlash from Beijing. For Washington and its allies, maintaining the status quo in Taiwan is critical, for reasons of security, credibility, and ideology. From a security perspective, Taiwan's return to Chinese control would severely weaken U.S. influence in East Asia. If the United States fails to defend Taiwan, allies like Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines may begin to doubt America's reliability, and could feel compelled to accommodate, or even align with, China. For Japan, Taiwan is indispensable. A friendly Taiwan ensures free navigation through the Bashi Channel, the northern gateway to the South China Sea. This route is a lifeline for Japan's economy. As an energy-poor nation, Japan imports more than 99% of its crude oil and nearly all of its natural gas. Around 90% of Japan's oil imports and 60% of its natural gas pass through the South China Sea and the Bashi Channel. As long as Taiwan remains outside Chinese control, China's access to the Western Pacific is constrained by narrow choke points like the Bashi Channel, the Miyako Strait, and passages near Japan's southwestern islands, areas effectively monitored by Japan and the United States. If China controlled Taiwan, it could pressure Japan directly from the Pacific side and threaten U.S. military bases in Guam and Hawaii, which are essential to regional stability. Combined with deep historical grievances from the Sino-Japanese Wars and ongoing disputes over the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, Taiwan's fate becomes inseparable from Japan's security. For Tokyo, the first island chain must not fall. Further south, the Philippines faces even more immediate risks. At its closest point, the Philippines lies just 140 kilometers from Taiwan. Manila is already locked in territorial disputes with China over the South China Sea, where Beijing claims nearly 80% of the waters, overlapping with areas granted to the Philippines under international law. In 2016, the Philippines won a landmark legal case against China at The Hague, but Beijing rejected the ruling. The United States remains the Philippines' primary security guarantor through a mutual defense treaty dating back to 1951, expanded again in recent years. If the U.S. fails to defend Taiwan, confidence in that guarantee could collapse. The Philippines might be forced into concessions, dramatically reducing U.S. influence over one of the busiest maritime corridors on Earth. For South Korea, the stakes are just as severe. If Taiwan falls, South Korea would find itself increasingly encircled by three nuclear-armed states, China, Russia, and North Korea, alongside Japan, with whom it has unresolved historical tensions. China's growing dominance could also intensify disputes in the East China Sea, threatening South Korea's vital shipping lanes. Taken together, China's control of Taiwan would represent a major defeat for the United States in great power competition, potentially signaling the beginning of the end of American dominance in East Asia, and perhaps globally. But the struggle over Taiwan is not just about power. It is also about ideas. Chinese leaders have repeatedly questioned whether liberal democracy is suitable for governing a country of over 1 billion people. Even respected Asian leaders like Lee Kuan Yew argued that Western-style democracy would destabilize China. Taiwan challenges that argument. Influenced by Western political ideals, Taiwan is today one of Asia's strongest democracies, ranked among the top democracies worldwide. Its success strengthens the ideological case for democracy in a region where authoritarian governance is on the rise. If China were to absorb Taiwan, even under a so-called one country, two systems model, it would mark a symbolic and ideological defeat for the United States and its allies. America's image as a defender of liberal values and human rights would suffer lasting damage. Political scientist Graham Allison warns that the rivalry between the United States and China mirrors a dangerous historical pattern known as the Thucydides trap. When a rising power threatens a dominant one, conflict often follows. Out of 16 historical cases studied, 12 ended in war. Today, with Taiwan at the center of U.S.-China rivalry, and the global order already under strain, the risk of conflict is no longer theoretical. Taiwan is not just a strategic asset. It is a test of power, credibility, and the future shape of the world. As relations between the United States and its European allies grow increasingly strained, Taiwan has become a critical test of American credibility in East Asia. For Washington, defending Taiwan is no longer just about one island. It is a signal of commitment, reliability, and leadership. The United States remains a central power in the region, bound by alliances and defense agreements. If Taiwan were lost, trust in America would erode rapidly. Long-standing partners might begin to doubt U.S. protection, potentially triggering profound shifts, including a remilitarized Japan. For China, however, Taiwan lies at the very heart of modern nationalism. Unlike in 1949, today's China is a global power, economically, technologically, and militarily. In this context, making concessions on Taiwan is politically unthinkable. Beijing has even enshrined its position into law. A Chinese statute explicitly seeks to prevent Taiwan from formally declaring independence, authorizing non-peaceful measures, if necessary. For China, this law reinforces the One China principle and serves as a clear warning to independence advocates. Taiwan, the United States, Japan, and the European Union see this law differently, viewing it as a major source of instability in the Taiwan Strait. Since its passage in 2005, Beijing has shown no intention of revising or repealing it, instead using it to justify increased military pressure around the island. Today's U.S.-China rivalry is fundamentally different from the Cold War confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union never sought to conquer Western Europe. China, by contrast, openly seeks control over Taiwan. And unlike the Soviet Union at its peak, China today possesses far greater economic strength, technological capacity, and military reach. The long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, designed to deter both Chinese aggression and Taiwanese independence, is reaching its limits. An armed conflict over Taiwan is no longer unthinkable. Such a war between the world's two leading nuclear powers would be catastrophic, unprecedented military losses, a global economic collapse driven by disrupted shipping lanes and semiconductor shortages, and severe technological regression. The entire Asia-Pacific order would be thrown into chaos. In the end, Taiwan is more than a geopolitical dispute. It is a fault line where nationalism, power, technology, and global stability collide. And how this issue is resolved may shape the future of the international system itself.